Hello, everybody. English language teachers around the world. That's right. It's time again for another American TESOL Institute webinar with your host, Jason Levine, also known as Fluency MC. I'm so glad to be back here again, this time to talk about how to remember English. First thing that needs to be said is this could be how to remember Arabic, how to remember Portuguese, right? Language, but we are focusing on English today because we are doing these webinars for English language teachers, ELTs worldwide. I'm glad you're here. Come on inside, people here live. Thank you for coming live. If you are watching asynchronously, as most of you are, respect, thanks for following us, and I hope you enjoy the webinar. So, let's get right to the 3 R's. Relax, repeat, remember. Get those out of the way. That's my motto, my credo, the words I live by, teach by, preach by, which is going to run through everything we're doing today. The most important thing to point out here is that relax really means do something enjoyable, interesting, meaningful, something that relaxes you in the sense that you are feeling good. You're not tense, you're not stressed, right? So that's really important when we're talking about memory and how we hold on to things, vocabulary, grammar structures. Repeat, we're going to get into that a lot. I'm sure that won't surprise anybody. Now, what is remembering? Well, kind of the opposite of forgetting something. It's something we often take for granted, right? How it works. You remember something. Well, what does that mean? It sticks in your head. You might know my song Stick, Stuck, Stuck. You might know that memory is my thing, which is why I talk about those 3 R's. And I made this rap because people were studying lists of irregular verbs, kids, adults around the world, didn't make sense. And I'm putting this picture here, especially because I want you to think when we talk about the different things, why I wrote this song and why it's become as popular as it has. I even went on this show, La France a un incroyable talent, because I think people relate to this idea, not just learning songs. There are other things happening, and I think that's why it works. So back to remembering. What is remembering? And why do you think I didn't want to call this session How to Memorize English? And that doesn't have to be a rhetorical question. You can put answers in the chat if you want to get it going. Why do you think I didn't like that idea? And I don't talk about memorizing. Remembering versus memorizing. And then we have acquisition versus learning. So when we remember something, we have learned it or acquired it. It's either something that happens incidentally, we're not aware or thinking about it, and paradoxically we remember it, or it's something we consciously tried to learn and maybe even memorize. To me, now there are different definitions, but to me, memorizing has the feeling of I need to get all of this stuff in my brain and not forget it. And there can be some drawbacks to that. Sometimes it works for people. But remembering is certainly less of the conscious decision to try to commit things to memory. And acquisition and learning are a little bit similar in the sense that something just kind of comes in without you consciously making an effort to do it. Now, I'm not suggesting that's how we should learn everything at all. Definitely the conscious part of learning is important as well. I think we should start by talking about the memory network that we have as human beings. What do I mean by a memory network? There are really 3 parts and sequential parts of this, right? First, we encode. We encode what? We encode, in this case, we're going to really focus on vocabulary, words, and of course, chunks of words. We're going to get to chunking, collocations, into syntax, possibly, right? But especially words, but the company words keep. right? So let's focus there. So if there's a new word that your student wants to learn, right, or your student needs to learn, how are they going to remember that? It's a process of first encoding it. Now, I'm not going to get too into the physiological side of this and the neurological side of this for two reasons. One is that's not my specialty. And number two, because perhaps surprisingly, at this point in human history, scientists still are very unclear about how this happens. There's a lot of ors as far as how this all works, which is interesting in itself. So how things are encoded is not really what we're going to talk about as much as what makes encoding, what promotes encoding, what makes it more likely that you are going to get that into a neural pathway and keep it there. That's storage, right? So all of these are very closely related, right? Because you're not going to store it if it hasn't been encoded. We're going to talk about what encoding means, but basically it's acquisition or learning. You're either acquiring it or learning it, and then you're going to store it. You're going to store it in your memory. Maybe you know there are two types of memory. We're going to talk about that in a moment. And then there's retrieval. That's the big one, isn't it? Even if you have something that has been encoded, it might be there, but you don't remember it. You can't access it. You can't recall it. That's, for example, what happens so much with vocabulary, isn't it? Where you feel like, oh God, I know that word. I've seen that word before. Or you're in a conversation, you can't remember it. Is it because it wasn't encoded? Or is it because it's there and you can't retrieve it? Well, you don't have to think too much about that because, again, scientists aren't really sure which it is. We're going to focus not so much on that and more on what makes it easier to encode and or retrieve. And how does that relate to storage? So let's look at encoding a bit. 4 basic ways we encode. We encode with sounds. It's like the sound of a word. And again, we're talking about words. We could do an example like, you meet someone and you're introducing yourself, and do you remember the person's name or not, right? And that's interesting. And you can talk about the acoustic, visual, semantic, tactile ways that you could remember or not remember if you don't do it. But let's talk about vocabulary. So there's the sound of the word. There's how the word looks when it's written. There's also associations with visuals and sounds that you can make, we're going to talk about. But at the base level, right, there is the sound of the word, there's the visual representation of the word, there's the meaning of the word, and then tactile or more experiential encoding, which is more of a feeling attached to it. It could be literally like touching something, tactile. That gets into also kinesthetic learning, like maybe not just associating a visual, but a feeling, a touch, a movement. So as you may already know or have guessed, doing more than one of these is you're going to have a better chance of encoding it and or retrieving it. We're going to get to that. It's really very, very connected. I'm moving on, but it's not because we're moving on from the idea of acoustic, visual, semantic, tactile. We're going to keep going with that throughout. So then there's the storage or retention. So you may not store it at all. It may be a phone number that you just need to know for 10 seconds. You're not going to remember it later, and that's good because you need to store things that are more important. So you might rehearse the number to keep it in your short-term memory. So what is it, 15 seconds or 20 seconds max short-term memory? And how many things, it's 5 to 10, average of 7 items you can keep in your short-term memory. How and when does it go to long-term memory? Right? Well, it has to do a lot with the encoding. Right? What efforts are we doing, whether it's conscious or not, or unconscious, right? To encode that. And if it is encoded well, you're going to remember. Are you going to be able to retrieve it? You see, we're always going to come back to this. Luckily, it's not as much about, is it encoded, can I retrieve it, as much as can I easily remember it? So here's retrieval. What's the difference between recall and recognition? This is fascinating and so important for language learning. Well, recognition, right, is when you've learned at some level, you've encoded a word in your memory, an understanding of it, how to spell it, what it means, how it sounds. But you're in a conversation and you can't recall it. I don't know, let's take a phrasal verb like come up with. You can't come up with it. You're talking to someone, you want to say, I was at a meeting and they asked us to, and you want to come up with some ideas, right? So you're saying they asked us to, have some, you can't remember. Well, you can't remember means what? In this case, you can't recall it. But how about if you're reading an article and you see they came up with some ideas? If you understand it, that means you recognize it, right? So what's the big problem for so many students and maybe you in your second language? It's that recall. It's that recall. So how can we make the recall happen? How can we get the information that you've probably encoded where it can be easily retrieved? And recognition has something to do with it. So just to recap, because it's important, isn't it? to review, to recap. We need that repetition, a memory network. We have encoding, storage, and retrieval. So encoding, I'm putting tactile out for the moment. Acoustic, visual, and semantic encoding is what I hope as teachers you're helping students do. So they're hearing words, they're seeing words, they're getting the meanings of words. But of course, just hearing it is not enough. Seeing it is not enough. And understanding the meaning is not enough. Even if you're doing all three, often we need what? Repetition is one thing, right? Maybe acoustic and visual together a lot. How about a visual that's not just the word written down? It's a visual that connects to the word to help you remember it, or where you were when you learned it, what you were talking about in context. What was the context? So that's imperative. Reading while listening, I've got to put that here as not number one in terms of importance, because so many things that we're going to talk about here are important, but reading while listening, why? Well, here we've got the acoustic and the visual. We have, right, the connection between the ways words are spelled and the way they sound, which is going to make it more likely that your brain will encode it and remember spelling and remember pronunciation. It doesn't have to be a conscious, phonics focused, learn how this word is spelled according to some rule or pattern. If you read enough while you listen, and that means, of course, song lyrics while you listen. That means subtitles while you watch something. Podcasts with scripts, audiobooks. My God, audiobooks are amazing. Games where you're hearing and reading at the same time. This is so important. And many people who become highly accurate and fluent and remember more of a language have done this. There's also, it has a fancy name, dual coding, which is combining visual and verbal information. So here it's not the same as combining visual and verbal, meaning the sound of the word and the way the word looks, but more an association with a visual. So it could be something like the word melancholy. You imagine that a melon, because you know the word melon and you can picture a melon, and the melon is sad. And all of a sudden, next time you hear melancholy or you see it, you recognize it. The meaning, the semantics are there because you've made this kind of connection with visuals. And I want to tell you about, if you've seen me do webinars recently, especially the English language teacher quiz show, you know this platform Bamboozle, and you know that I'm crazy about it for making games. I've always been a game guy, repetition through games, chunking through games, video through games, everything is gamify everything, and I'm not alone in that, obviously, in the world. And Bamboozle's created by someone who definitely feels games and education the way that I do. And many of the games here that people create for themselves, you can create them. You don't have to have a paid membership. There is a paid membership. You can create games very easily. So this is Bamboozle. So we have here images. Now this could be very low level, right? Like it's a scavenger hunt. Very cool idea, right? And that's also the tactile way to have to remember also. But left shoes, right shoes, pajamas, toy, purple things. These could be new words or not. They're much more likely to remember them, aren't they, with a picture? Now, if you think, okay, of course, flashcards with pictures, is that dual coding? Yes, anything with a picture. But if you're just looking at a picture without playing a game, without doing something meaningful and fun, I think you're thinking too much about learning. I'm just learning this, as opposed to, right, acquiring the vocabulary through playing a fun game. Check out this one. There's much more now on the site with GIFs and movement. And here we're looking also at chunking, which we're going to get into, right? So collocations. And we can take a look at the answers. Wash your hands, think about it, laugh out loud. So of the things we talked about so far, we've got dual coding. Not so far, I'm just going to bring everything in. It's coming in chunking, the collocations, right? We've got a game. So it's not this extrinsic exercise. I need to learn this. I have to learn this. So that's a bit of Bamboozle. If you haven't checked it out, I strongly recommend it. And we have in our audience, I don't know if you could figure out who it is, a very, very big fan, super big fan of Bamboozle. Maybe even a bigger fan than I am, if you could believe that. There it is, chunking. What is chunking? Well, you as English language teachers, you know about the lexical approach, collocations. You know chunking is the key to remembering vocabulary. But chunking by itself, or how about chunking, like we said, with a game, chunking with the song, bringing all these other ways that we can encode and retrieve more that we're learning. But chunking, you don't have to be a language teacher to know about chunking. How would you remember this number? You could do a short-term memory, 167720941, 167, okay, and you've got it for that short period. But if you want to remember it longer, you chunk it. Maybe you do 1677, 2094. If I say that a few times, I'm probably going to encode it just because I chunked it. If you want to learn about say and tell, you can study grammar rules. You can make lists of chunks. Say what you feel, say it loud. Tell a friend, tell the truth. You're going to have a much better chance of remembering those chunks if they are contextualized in a song. I have a song for say and tell, in a poem, in a story, in a video, in a game. Part of that is the context, and part of that is also the repetition. You know we're getting to repetition soon, right? Rhyme and rhythm. Why are they so important? I can do, and I do I do a webinar just on this. But let's look. Both rhyme and rhythm organize information into chunks. We chunk with rhyme. How? Because the end of the phrase or the sentence rhymes with the end. Oh, suddenly there's a connection. You've chunked it. Easier to encode that into memory. Rhythm, same thing. It has to do with the next thing here about predictable patterns. So the pattern of the rhyme is chunked. The rhythm too, it repeats, and it's not just these separate things. You start to chunk together the rhythm in music, and in a sentence, it works the same way. So when you know what's coming next, right? It's like what I do with my students, where I say, if I say hello, what do you say? They say hello. And I say, well, if I say hello, they say, it's me, right? Because that has been encoded, burned into their minds, because it's a song, because there is a rhythm and rhyme there to help them remember it. When you know what's next in a conversation, when you know what comes next in your brain, that is fluency, right? And that comes from chunking. Chunking with rhythm and rhyme, chunking with collocations, all about the chunking. And that's why you hear people say all the time, it's all about collocations, it's all about the chunks. I mentioned earlier how rhyme can help us with sound spelling relationships. You don't have to think about, is it tough or through, or right? You know, tough, rough, through, and you know through and to rhyme, even though the spelling is different, because they rhyme. If they rhyme, especially when you're reading, remember reading while you're listening, you're going to remember much more. And rhythm, kinesthetic learning, tactile encoding, rhythm helps us remember as well. Let's talk a little bit about rhyme and rhythm. Is it easy to remember these words? I don't think so. And there's no context here. So you can contextualize them to get some meaning, some collocations, right? So I don't know, heat up a bun in the oven, right? Put on shoes. We saw that earlier in the bamboozle game. But what about this? This is called rhyme pegging. You're pegging a rhyme, in this case, a number: 1 bun, 2 shoe, 3 tree, 4 door. Now, this is a very basic way to use rhyme. It's more just to show you how rhyme can help. I'd argue we should contextualize it with rhyme, and we're going to get to that in just a moment. But isn't it easier for you now to remember these words? I think you can probably remember some of them. That's rhyme that's helping you there. What about rhythm? And why am I showing you a hamburger, or more specifically, a Big Mac, to talk about rhythm? Well, if you're from the United States, about my age, and someone says, do you remember the commercial for Big Mac? And if you're saying, well, I don't know which one, and they say, to all beef, you go, oh, to all beef patty, special sauce, lettuce, cheese, pickles, onions on a sesame seed bun. You retrieve it right away. Why? There's no rhyme there, just rhythm, nothing rhymed. Rhythm is often just as powerful to remember. To all beef patty, special sauce, lettuce, cheese. I think I put it here. Yes, there it is. It's because it's chunked. To all beef patties, special sauce, lettuce, cheese, pickles, onions on a sesame seed bun. It's chunked and there's rhythm. And one more thing, repetition. Just like the Adele song. How many times have my students heard that song so that they come up with it right away? Mnemonics. Perhaps some of you thought when you saw the title, How to Remember English, and we're talking about the memory network, you thought about this word. And maybe when you think about mnemonics, you're thinking about acronyms or little strategies to remember things. Yes, that's true. But really, everything we've talked about so far, if it's something that is a conscious way to try to remember, to learn something, right? Trying to give a little boost to learning, that's a mnemonic, right? So for example, rhymes, right? Some people would say a song, when you rhyme and put rhythm in, that's a mnemonic device. More typically, we think of things like, My very educated mother just served us nachos. It used to be 9 pizzas because Pluto was a planet, but now we no longer have Pluto as a planet. So I can remember the order of the planets with this mnemonic device, but that's not so good for learning words and vocabulary. So I'm not going to talk too much about those. But anyway, whether it's something like that, or it is a rhyme, it's chunking, it's a game, these are mnemonics in the sense that they make it easier to retrieve something. How? By creating some association. That's the key. What is the association? So I gave the example earlier of melancholy. The sad melon makes me remember. Another example from my experience is in French, amer means bitter. And I think of an American, amer is bitter, right? It's that kind of visual image, or it could be more acoustic, but you've created an association that's more meaningful for you, and that's how you remember it. Rhyme is a very common one. It doesn't have to be a song. The rain in Spain falls mainly on the plain. You snooze, you lose. Too bad not every idiom isn't a rhyme, right? But the ones that rhyme are easier to remember. Teach the ones that rhyme. It can also help so much with not just remembering, but with pronunciation. Here's a great example with snooze, you lose, when we're talking about the sound spelling relationships. Sometimes students look at lose and they think lows, or right, because it's kind of irregular, the ooh there, but it rhymes with snooze, a blast from the past. These next two are my own. I have a lot of them. This one, why? In that month, on that day, at that time, I'll go away. Oh, in a month, in, on, at, right? On a day, at a time. The prepositions are not always the same in other languages. This one I created recently because my French students in French, allow doesn't require the indirect object. So you can say, you know, this allows to do this, right? It's also with permits, like this permits to do it, right? No, allows us to do it, permits someone to, right? So allow me to go, please don't say no. So you know it's allow me, allow us, allow them. You can also make rhymes with idioms like this. So I have here, get the ball rolling, get this project off the ground, get down to business, stop messing around. So if those are on a list with definitions, now, are the definitions here? Is it enough in context here to know the meaning? Maybe not so much. You could do that more in class. But if they know the meanings and they just can't remember, this can be a way to encode with rhyme and rhythm. Let's get the ball rolling and get this project off the ground. We need to get down to business and stop messing around. Chunking, rhythm, rhyme, acoustic, visual, and a picture would be nice here too, right? Get the ball rolling with a picture, project off the ground. We're not sure of our next move. It's still up in the air. Keep your eye on the ball. Stick with it. You're almost there. True or false, everybody? I know every capital of every country in the world. True or false? I can list every country and capital city off the top of my head in geographical order. Geographical order is not a real term, I don't think, but meaning I can start in one part of the world and I can do it in sequence. Rabat, Morocco, Algiers, Algeria, Tunis, Tunisia, Tripoli, Libya, Cairo, Egypt, Khartoum, Sudan, Juba, South Sudan, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, Mogadishu, Somalia, Djibouti, Asmara, Eritrea. Or I can start with Europe, Oceania, Ngaramud, Palau, Port Moresby, Papua New Guinea, Canberra, Australia, Palikir, Micronesia, Majuro, Marshall Islands, Tarawa, Kiribati. I can keep going. Why? Is it amazing, or is it simply because I repeated it so often and I chunked it and I had visuals and all the things we're talking about? Do you know the 100 most common words in spoken English? What would you guess are words in the top 100? Now, what do you think, guys? True or false? I have this list in my head from the, number 1, to well, number 100. How? Acoustic encoding, visual encoding, chunking, and repetition. You don't believe me? Here we go. The be end of a and do, have to it at that for you. He with on do say this, they at, but we, because I chunked it. Look, you could do it too. Now, you would have to be motivated like me to want to do it. And I'm not suggesting you should do it. But I am suggesting you apply the principles that I applied to remember this, which is chunking them, the be end of a and to, have to it I that for you. Those are the chunks. There's rhythm, the be end of a and to, have to wit I that for you. There's rhyme, not rhyme everywhere, notice, but there's enough rhyme to help. We've got rhythm, we've got rhyme, we've got chunking. How did I do it? I read it while I listened. Right? I made a recording. I did it myself, reading it. And then what did I do? I listened while I read. I repeated it. Repetition, guys, that is not everything, of course, because if you repeat something boring, if you repeat something rote learning, if it's not, there we go, meaningful in some way. So that was meaningful to me to want to know all the capitals and countries in the world. Why? So I could say, I know all the capitals and countries? No, because then it would be easier, I thought, and I was correct, to notice more about the world, to know more about what's going on, to connect more because I could remember. I had a foundation that allowed me to think more analytically and critically, that I could build on top because I had that. As far as the most common words in English, the be end of a and to, have to it at that for you, I actually use that because I make materials where I need to know the frequency of words. I got tired of looking at the lists. So that was a bit of an experiment and fun because I like to make songs, but it actually is useful for me. It may not be useful for somebody else. The more you repeat something, the stronger the connection for encoding it and or retrieving it. Again, the jury is out on, is it because you encoded it well that you remember and retrieve it, or is it because there was something about the retrieval? In any case, it's the repetition using all of those strategies we've talked about, the chunking, rhythm and rhyme, something in context, not a list. And also this, I have a feeling some of you either here live or watching have thought about this already, spaced repetition. So not, I'm going to try to memorize all this stuff right now, just now, right before the test. How come I can't remember it a week later? But what is spaced repetition really? A lot of people throw this term around. Not enough people, in my opinion, think about it when it happens incidentally. Maybe that's not the best word. When it happens because you're not planning it, it's just happening naturally. Let me tell you a story. It's a story I often tell about a student I met in Poland who spoke almost like she was bilingual, and she really wasn't. I found out very quickly her parents didn't speak English. She had no people to talk to in English in her family. She went to English class. She was 14 years old. This is in Warsaw, Poland. How did she learn English to the point where she was so accurate and fluent that I thought she was bilingual? Well, she was playing a game online with people, but it wasn't the game so much as she was watching YouTube gamer videos, tutorials. And she'd watch the tutorial and she repeated them. She watched the same tutorials again and again, but she didn't watch them again and again at that same time. She'd watch one, she'd go play, she'd go back and watch it again. She was doing spaced repetition without planning it. She was intrinsically motivated to do better at the game. She wasn't trying to learn English consciously, making a decision to improve her English. That, my friends, is a winning combination. It's definitely about spaced repetition. Is it something you do without planning it because you're just so into it that you're going back to reading something again, watching something again at different points? Or is it planned? There are many apps for planning spaced repetition. I think I have a little list here. Oh, it's coming. So you can plan it. Okay, today I'm going to try to remember these words, and then I'm going to try to remember in 24 hours, and then I'm going to try this. Tons of advice online, videos and blogs and everything else about spaced repetition. But, right, to my mind, even better way is to get into something, whether it's a songs, games, funny short videos, short stories, whatever it is, you go back to naturally to do again. Games, probably the best. I put this here because I have another story I tell a lot, but I've got to put it in here, which is a student from Korea who almost never said anything in class. And I said, I always, or something like this. And she said, Coca-Cola, very loudly. Always Coca-Cola. She'd made a chunk, a collocation, because that commercial was on TV, on the radio, on the bus. She was getting spaced repetition, right? She was seeing always Coca-Cola, then hearing it later. That's how companies do it to get you to remember. Sometimes it's the rhythm and rhyme, right? We talked about. Often it's a combination, right? It's the spaced repetition. It's the chunking of words, putting them with rhythm and rhyme. And then you see them here, you see them there, right? That's how they get stuck. And that's why I could say to my students, and they'd say, just do it. Kentucky Fried Chicken. And earlier, hello, it's me, right? That's remembering things without being conscious. I'm not against strategies, mnemonics, if it helps you to remember things by planning and trying. But if you can get hooked on something, not just hooked on advertisers, hooked on a game, hooked on a song, hooked on a TV series that you repeat, gamer videos, but there are apps like this out there that you can use that bring you that content again at different intervals, that right, they plan the spaced repetition for you. I prefer Bamboozle. Bamboozle back again. You need images, right? You need fun. You need the spaced repetition. Bamboozle, these types of games, my students go back to. We go back to at certain times. That's spaced repetition. But they're not thinking we're doing spaced repetition. But you know what? You go back to this game, and if they do it themselves later at home, they're getting the spaced repetition. Guess what? It's a combination again of images, right? The sounds, the presentation, the moment when we're learning together, they're remembering that gives them more that experiential learning, that tactile learning. To me, this is everything that we're talking about, right? I'm making sure I've got a nice collocation, right? Put out the fire. It's in a sentence. It's not contextualized beyond that, but we've got an image. We're doing it in a game. Top 10 tips to remember English, which is something we could have called this session. Instead, I put it at the end. Here we go. Partly review and a few things in here that I didn't mention. Number one, absolutely positively has to be this. Context, context, context. Associations. Chunk the words, get them in context. Something we didn't talk about. English, like every language, but especially English, has a vast vocabulary. Which words to remember? Well, what do your students need to do? What do they want to do? They're more likely to remember things that pertain to themselves personally, their academic careers, their professional careers if they're older, their interests, obviously. It's like a menu at a restaurant. You want to understand everything on the menu? Okay, that's still difficult. but that's possible. But are you going to order everything and eat everything? No. So in terms of what you're going to remember, you want to be selected. Now, when I say certain words, I hope you understand, I mean in collocations, in phrases. So the semantics are clear. I'm not talking about a word and a definition. I'm not talking about a list. So when I say words, that's why I put that one up first, about context. That's what I mean. You're selecting them. So again, write words down does not mean write one word down. It means write the chunk down, write the phrase down. Vocabulary notebooks, there are many ways to make them. That's another webinar. Some ways work better than others, but writing them down. There's a lot we could say about that too, right? And some people argue that it's writing it down with a pen or a pencil, that tactile experience is more, it helps encode and or retrieve later better than if you type it. The jury's out on that one. But writing them down, if it means remembering where you were at that moment, right? Taking them again later, spaced repetition, putting them in a notebook, making a flashcard. The goalless method is very interesting. A lot of polyglots use it. I don't know if you heard of it. Check it out. It's where you are, right, learning a bunch of words, and then the next day, the ones you don't remember, you focus on those, and you're kind of going like this. Very interesting. Please read while listening. Songs, to me, the best, because you've got the rhythm and the rhyme there. You've got the stories, the context in a song, but of course you have stories, context in everything else here, just not necessarily the rhythm and rhyme, which can really help encode and retrieve more, as we talked about today a lot. But anything while you're reading, while listening, is going to help you remember. And spaced repetition, which we just talked about. Read and listen below your comprehension level. We didn't talk about this. It's enormously important. If you're reading something or listening to something to understand it, that's not the same as reading or listening to something so you remember the vocabulary, the grammar structures, the pronunciation, the spelling. That happens more when you don't use your brain to analyze and try to understand what's going on. So you might say as an adult, well, I don't want to read a kid's book or listen to a kid's show. I get that. And that's one reason I make songs that the themes and the vocabulary and everything else is more suited for a teen or an adult, because you don't want to dumb down the content. That being said, you may have had the experience, or your students may have the experience of reading things that are for younger people and enjoying them. Maybe not for little kids, but if you know what I mean, like a book for a teenager has all the phrasal verbs, present perfect, everything's there, but you're more likely to remember it, to encode it and remember it, because you're not using your brain to figure it out. Another strategy with this one is, before you watch a movie or read a book in English, if your first language is not English, you do it in your first language, or you go to a book, you already know the story, right? So you're not using your brain to figure it out. You're going to be more likely to remember the words, the vocab, the grammar, everything else. Experiment with mnemonic techniques. Okay, we said a song, some people say, is a rhyming mnemonic. Okay, but some of the techniques I didn't go into detail. Explore out there. Some are better than others for second language learning. Teach others your words. You hear a lot of people talking about how when you could really remember something when you teach it. I think part of that is the connection you're making. Part of that is the repetition, a huge part of it, because if you're going to teach it, you're going to, like I'm doing tonight, I had to go through and look at encoding, retrieval. I didn't do a great job with it, but I got enough of it to remember it to teach you. Now that I've done it today, I'm more likely to remember the things that I talked about. Part of that is repetition. Part of that is like the emotional connection we're making when we're teaching. Play games, especially play games with songs. Have songs that are games, right? All those things we're talking about. Integrate them, use new words, use it or lose it. Hey, there's another rhyme. Use it or lose it. Now, use it or lose it could be also the practice, practicing it is use it or lose it, meaning the repetition, but also in real life, because there's also that emotional connection. If you use it and you got it in the context, you're more likely to use it again. If you're positively reinforced for using it in the right situation, and also you're getting the repetition with it. This is what it's all about, folks. It's remembering, creating that base. If you know Bloom's taxonomy, this is a very simplified look at it, and that's enough for my purpose here today. When you're practicing English, meaning you're getting repetition with it through the games, through the songs, through the memes, right? Through short conversations you're having in the classroom, dialogues, whatever it is. If it's contextualized, if it's meaningful, not just a list of words, not of definitions, you're more likely to remember it, then you can go higher. But if you try to analyze too much and think too much, study, you're not going to get that base. So as I mentioned, knowing the countries and capitals gives me that base to then think at a higher level about the world. The fact that I can remember the top 100 words in English and also top 100 nouns, verbs, adjectives, 3 more lists of 100, for me personally helps me understand and analyze better the English language, right? From a linguistic perspective. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here for this American TESOL Institute webinar. Signing off from Paris, France. It's Jason Levine, also known as Fluency MC, wishing you a wonderful morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are, English language teachers worldwide. Thank you very much. Respect, salute. See you later. Bye.